Welcome. You're listening to episode 32 of Pause and Play with Dr. J, the Preventive Vet podcast. On today's show, we learn how to train your dog to do anything in 4 simple steps. By the way, did you know that we have 101 tips books that are fun and educational for the whole family? And they make great gifts for dog and cat people to help keep their fur family happy, healthy, and safe. Take a look inside and read reviews at shop.preventivevet.com. And now, let's start the show. Welcome back to another episode of Pause and Play with Dr. J. I am your co-host, Mia, and I do not have Dr. J with me here today, but I do have Preventive Vet's very own certified dog trainer, Kathy Madsen. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you, Mia?
I am doing all right, a little bit chilly.
It is cold outside.
It is cold. I've already started making my my wintry or late fall comfort food.
Yes, you made our lunch for the office today, and it is delicious.
Thank you. Spaghetti squash.
Oh, so good.
I never thought that I would have liked spaghetti squash as a child, but guess what?
Our tastes change.
Yeah. Thank you, taste buds, for helping me on my Weight Watchers journey that has not started again yet. Plenty of time for that.
Exactly. After Thanksgiving tomorrow.
Yes. Happy belated Thanksgiving, everybody. We are recording this the day before, so hopefully you are plenty stuffed, did not fight with your family, had a safe and gratitude-filled Thanksgiving with your animals, and that your football team won.
Yes.
As long as it's the Bears, then.
I'm okay with that.
Thank you. So Kathy, you know, when you and I actually first started talking about what the topic for today, which I'm really excited about, how to teach your dog to do anything in 4 easy steps. Like, first of all, how is this possible? And secondly, I think this topic came up because one of our listeners had written in actually and wanted to know how to train her dog how to actually get up onto a couch.
Right.
And you were like, "Oh, it's so easy. You can train your dog to do anything." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Well, and this is something that when I taught group classes more and now during my private training sessions, that my goal as a dog trainer is to actually teach my clients how to think like a dog trainer themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they have the mindset and the tools that they need to train their dog for life.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than just doing it for them, right?
Which you can't live with them. So like how?
Yeah, and this is where board and train programs can be tough because you leave a dog with a trainer for 4 weeks and they're probably going to do fantastic training with your dog as long as they aren't using aversive training tools, which are more common in board and train. But they're going to be able to get your dog to do a lot of things because they have the practice in the training mechanics. They know the process that they need to go through to teach a new behavior. But then the dog gets home and the owner's kind of like, okay, yeah, they did it for like a day and then I don't know why they're not doing it for me anymore, right? Which is going to be another topic I'll write about of why your dog isn't doing what you want.
Stay tuned, folks.
Yes, especially in the case of my dog knows how to do this.
Right.
You know, they know better, you know, things like that. We can definitely do a podcast for that too. But my whole goal is to teach dog owners, you know, how to think like a dog trainer. And so for our topic today, the how to teach your dog to do anything, first thing I want to mention for the listeners is this is in regards to like training a new skill, so like a new action.
Right. So not trying to get them to stop doing something.
Right. Or say you have a dog who is leash reactive, reacts with barking and lunging to other dogs when they see them on leash, or resource guards. So guards.
Yes, I have a tiny pug like that. Yes.
Yeah. So these steps are not for behavior modification. That is changing behavior that's already there. That's rooted in fear sometimes or other kinds of things. So yeah, resource guarding, leash reactivity, fear aggression, those are more behavior modification. And if a listener has a dog dealing with that, then definitely you can contact us and connect with me. But I really recommend connecting with a local certified behavior consultant or a certified dog trainer who also specializes in behavior. And this is kind of where the certifications do matter, because some trainers specialize more in the obedience side of things, right? Which is what we're going to talk about today.
And there's like 10 million different. Kathy actually wrote like a whole article, right, about all of the, or maybe not even all of them, but like a gigantic cornucopia, since we're in the Thanksgiving season, a
So
gigantic
Yeah.
cornucopia of content around like the various certification programs and letters after.
It's an alphabet soup
Yeah.
of different certifications, but some are targeted towards the obedience skills or sports training, things like that, versus the behavior consulting is more targeted towards that behavior modification. So dealing with those more deeply rooted, aggression, fear, anxiety, that kind of stuff. So what we're talking about today is not behavior modification. It is if you want to teach your dog a new trick, and technically all obedience skills are tricks to your dog. They really aren't that useful in the dog's mind, but other than to get them things they like. But sit for us, we're like, oh, basic obedience. Like that's, very basic. And to the dog, it's just a trick. Right. So this is all about teaching your dog an action that they're doing. And you can all say hi to my dog, Sookie, who just made her presence known. Hey, Sookie Bean. She goes, I'm here. And I hear the dogs outside barking.
We're going to let her out to explore.
Yes.
Oh, there you go, hon. Oh. Gotta wait for me to open the door.
She goes, I want out.
So, yes, we'll be talking about how to train your dog, how to do something new.
An action.
In action, yeah.
So, yes, now that we talked about that, because I don't want someone reading this and going, oh, I can teach my dog not to attack my other dog when they're freaked out. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to get in the mindset of a dog trainer. So 4 easy steps, and we'll kind of dive into each step as we go, because there are kind of things you have to know about each step to set yourself up for success and to set the dog up for success. So the first thing I always think about is I have to be very clear in step 1 of what is it that I want to train.
Right.
Right. So it's not. This is something that a lot of us humans, like, we tend to do. Is like, I want my dog to not bark.
Right.
And I'm like, that's great. But the dog isn't thinking of that as an action, because it's not an actual action. It's an absence of an action.
Right.
So I have to think of how can I train an action or a behavior that's incompatible with barking.
Right.
So that would be closing your mouth.
Right.
So you need to think a little bit more specifically about what it is that you're going to be training. Because
it's a little, it's troubleshooting, right? It's kind of like putting a puzzle together and thinking about what that incompatible action might be.
Yeah, and the biggest one, probably the one I talk about the most with clients, is their dog jumps on people for attention or from excitement or whatever.
We've got a few at the office.
Yeah. I mean, Mary Berry is just springs in her legs,
Yeah.
And that for her is very rewarding. It's fun for her to do, right? And then it sometimes gets reinforced by certain people in the office. So if I'm talking to a client with a dog who jumps and they go, well, I don't want them to jump on people. So, well, what do you want them to do instead? What should be their new greeting behavior? Because we're going to teach them, okay, you sit in order to get what you were getting from jumping. So if you were getting attention and you were getting talked to and eye contact and pet, even if the petting, quote unquote, is pushing the dog down or like moving them away, a lot of dogs are like, oh, you're touching me, right? Totally worked for them. So we have to think about what do we want them to do instead to get the reinforcement they were getting before, and then be really consistent. So you have to think about, in this first step of deciding what you want to train, you have to get really specific, right? And then for other examples, like teaching tricks, teaching your dog to do a spin, right? People be like, I want to teach my dog that. And I go, okay, well, which direction? And how tight of a spin do you want? So you can get really precise in your criteria that you're going to look for. And that actually sets your dog up for success, but it also sets you up for success in the following steps, because you can track your progress and then determine when you're ready to move to the next step for your dog, which means that it's a better learning experience for your dog. It's easier for them to learn. You're not expecting too much too soon. You're able to figure out, okay, this is too hard of a step that I'm taking in raising my criteria, so I'm going to go back, right? So it really puts you in the mindset of being a great teacher, and analyzing your own teaching skills by setting yourself up with the exact criteria that you start with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, because also, even just it makes sense, but it adds a little bit more complexity to probably, what we as pet owners versus trainers. I mean, this is why it's great that you're bringing it up in terms of thinking like a trainer. Like when you say, okay, yeah, somebody wants to teach their dog how to spin, and then you go a step further and go, okay, which way? Like I wouldn't think about that. I'd be like, as long as they're spinning, great. And I wouldn't think that I would trip my dog up by not specifying,
Well, and what's funny too is then, because if I have a client, I say, well, which direction? They go, I don't care.
Right.
Then I go, okay, well, then we're going to reward either direction from your dog. But when you ask them to spin, don't be upset if they spin one way and then the other. Like to them, that's going to be the same behavior, right? So that, and again, that's just setting yourself up for success. So it's like if you're training a dog to raise one paw and you're trying to teach them left versus right, you have to be very consistent in what you're marking and rewarding, which is something we'll talk about in a couple steps. And so that way the dog knows the criteria, they know the behavior, versus us having this idea of what it's supposed to be, but never taking the time to teach the dog those specific steps. Right. And another good example of kind of knowing the criteria and working step by step is like the fetch behavior, the fetch cue. For a dog, you can slice that down. And again, we'll talk more about slicing the behavior in the next step too. But that is, okay, go to the object, put your mouth on the object, hold it with your mouth, pick it up, hold it and bring it back all the way to me, and then put it in my hand and let go.
And each of those you're saying is a separate trained
Yes.
step.
So, you can slice it really, really small. And for some dogs, they don't need that many slices.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But when you're thinking about any possible criteria for a behavior, you can be really precise.
Yeah.
When you do it. So, and that can make it easier for some dogs that are having trouble either going to the next step. You just think, well, how can I slice this step even smaller? So it really is about setting yourself up for success, working on your teaching skills, and planning ahead to make it easier for your dog to learn something new.
So I guess, is there anything else that, like, when you talk about first getting people into that trainer mindset, like, is there anything else that we need to, like, as just owners, leave at the door? Like, I'm just thinking, there's a lot of things, just reactionary things that we could easily do that could screw up the training.
I think one of the hardest things for all of us, trainers and regular pet owners sometimes, is checking our expectations and not giving our dogs the benefit of the doubt. So a good point to make actually is when you're teaching your dog anything new, you want to make sure that they can do it physically, that it isn't going to make them uncomfortable, especially with older dogs. I mean, and older dogs can definitely learn new things. I love training older pups, senior dogs. So, I mean, it keeps their brain engaged.
Right, I was
going
to
say,
that. Yeah.
But you might want to give them the benefit of the doubt, especially like, for example, my dog, she's almost 10. She's starting to show me with just some hesitation of, well, I don't want to walk that way, or I don't want to go up the stairs this way, or something like that, right? So I'm watching her hesitation because she might be feeling some pain, some arthritis starting, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to give the dog the benefit of the doubt and think about, is this making my dog uncomfortable? Is it freaking them out for some other reason?
Right, yeah.
Right? And so I have to put myself in their head a little bit.
Sure.
And then think about, do I need to train that if it's making them uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And honestly, I have never thought of something other than, say, maybe recall, that it's kind of like they have to know that.
Right.
Right. I always think about training should be only train things that make you and your dog happy and keep them safe.
Yeah.
and keep others safe, right? Those are kind of my basic criteria for training.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with not training something if it's not needed in your life and it's not fun for you and your dog and it's not something that's going to, if it doesn't put them in danger by not knowing it, like, or other people. So yeah, things like recall is a big one.
Leave it and drop it, probably.
Leave it and drop it, yeah. But there's other, like name recognition works just as well as leave it and drop it.
Yeah.
If they're looking up at me, then they're not putting something in their mouth.
That's true. Yes.
So more thinking like a dog trainer. You can take very basic behaviors and use them as incompatible behaviors for other.
Yeah. See, this is where like you just really need to do that puzzle working to put the two things together. So I love that. So, you talked a little bit, or you mentioned the slicing.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get into that and go over a little bit more of what fetch? I think is maybe not as sexy of a thing to train.
So fetch.
Sexy to play, but
yeah. Yeah, so it kind of takes us into the step 2. So the step 1 was decide what you want to train, like set your criteria up. Step 2 is very simplified. You make the behavior happen. Right. And there's a couple ways you can do this. We'll get into that slicing in a second because that's part of the third kind of method. But the first thing you really want to do when you're making a behavior happen is you want to just set up your environment to encourage the behavior to naturally happen.
Okay. So for example, if you don't mind, if we used the our listeners, question for trying to, so she wants to train her dog how to get up on the couch, which is not usually, I think, what people are trying to train.
Usually it's
but
the
bless
opposite.
you. Yeah.
Well, and so for environmental setup, not knowing all the details about her dog, like if she has a very small dog, right, then the environmental setup would be putting some stairs next to the couch or a little ramp next to the couch. But if she has a bigger dog, the environmental setup for that's different than, say, teaching a dog to heel, because the environmental setup's kind of already there. The couch is there.
Right.
So you just have to think about, is it easy for the dog to get up on the couch? Is the coffee table in the way?
Mm-hmm.
Is it not provide a lot of room? So then I'm just going to back the coffee table up so it's a little bit easier to work on this. But say if you're teaching a dog to walk on your left side and not walk in front of you within an inch of your leg, and their front legs never move past the seam of your pants, that is an official heel, competition style. If you're going to work up to that, well, then an environmental setup might be, say, practicing in a long hallway of your home and using that wall as an environmental block on the other side of the dog. So it encourages them to stay closer to you as you work up through your criteria, simply by not providing any extra space. Right. So it helps move them closer. Or say you're working outside on leash, on heel, and you use one of like the little parking lot curbs, or sidewalk curb in a safe area, not on like active street, or like a hedge,
Sure,
so you're using an environmental setup to your advantage to encourage behavior that you're then going to reward. Or like another example, I saw one trainer, I can't remember who right now, but they were talking about, okay, well, we're going to teach like canine freestyle, which is like dancing with your dog and super fun to watch. We're going to teach them to walk around like an umbrella that you're holding or a pole or whatever. So you set up like a big X pen in a circle with a cone or the umbrella in the middle, and then you can adjust the size of the X pen so the dog naturally will walk around it. And then you work on getting it smaller and smaller and smaller, rather than having to rely on your body language and your movement to get them to move around something.
Right. So it's making it easier on you.
Yeah, totally. And it's making it easier on the dog because in like for the healing example with the wall, they don't have anywhere to go. Right. Yeah. So it's brilliant. Set you up for success. So that's the first part of making the behavior happen. So that can really help. Probably the most common way of making a behavior happen in obedience training is what we call luring, lure and reward training. And it's usually how I started people off in my group classes when they were learning the sits and the downs and everything. So luring the behavior is when you have a treat in your closed fist or in the tips of your fingers, and you're using that food in front of the dog's nose to guide their movement and their body position. So you're keeping it pretty close to their face.
Yeah.
And they're usually going to keep their nose close to your hand because they can smell the treat. And then you can use that. If you can control the head, you can control the body. And so that makes it easier to move them into position. And then once they hit the sit position or the down position, that's when they get the treat. So that's using food as a lure. The biggest tip here, if you're using lure-based training, is to try to jump from that first step of having food in front of the dog to simply having a hand prompt. So no food in the lure. It's just a closed fist, but your dog has learned, following your hand is awesome because it usually ends in a treat. So that breaks apart the bribing part of training that some people do get stuck in because it works for the most part. But the downside of that is the dog then learns, I'm only going to do it when there's food around.
Right.
If there's not food around, I'm not as motivated, so why? Versus, so it goes from the treat makes the behavior happen at first to switching to the behavior makes the treat happen. Sometimes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that switch should happen. I like doing that pretty early in training the behavior. But that's important for everyone if they're going to use food in their luring, which is also one reason why, because bribing happens so easily, and it's easy to fall into, is that's why I actually like doing what we call shaping the behavior and using a clicker or a marker word.
Right.
And you can use a clicker with luring, right? And especially with like a more complicated movement that the dog needs to do, sometimes luring really helps. But when you really get into shaping a behavior and using marker training, it is an awesome training tool. And you see dogs, just the light bulb goes off and they're engaged with the training. They're not simply following you around, like waiting for you to show them what to do. They're trying to think ahead, going, what do you want me to do? Like, what do I have to do to make you click or say yes or say click, whatever your marker word is. So it's a really fun way to train, and you tend to get faster learning because the dog is trying to raise the criteria for you. So it's super fun as well. And you can train more complex behaviors. So this is where the slicing comes down when you're starting to shape. I was about to say, can you explain shaping? Yeah. And there's a couple different kinds of shaping. There's free shaping, which I'll talk about in a minute, but then there's also shaping using luring. Okay. You can use a lure in shaping. So, for example, slicing down the lie down cue. You can slice that, and I've actually done this with dogs who have like really deep chests or dogs just that don't enjoy lying down. Which again, I'm always like, does it hurt them to lie down? Yeah. Do they not want to? Do I have to do this? And so I environmentally set it up where I'm going to put down a softer blanket, so they're not laying down on the rubber floor of the classroom or whatever. I'm not going to ask them to lie down on concrete, things like that, right? So I make it more comfortable. And then I simply slice it of the first part of laying down is dropping your head a little bit towards the floor. So you drop it just a little bit, I'm going to mark and treat. And I can make that happen either by taking a little food lure in front of their nose and kind of just dropping their head a little bit towards the floor. And I go, yes, and I give a treat. Right. And then the next time I might go a little bit further if they're willing to follow it. And then yes, and give a treat, or click and give a treat. And then a little bit further. And I just build them up depending on how much they want to do it determines my speed.
Suddenly your dog's a bobblehead.
Right. But and it's kind of like when the dog is easily following that lure and almost anticipating it, then I know, okay, now it's time to raise the criteria. Yeah. And up the ante a little bit for the dog. But eventually, the dog works through, okay, my head's going down, and naturally their front legs are going to start bending too, right, and kind of going forwards. So you slice that whole movement of laying down from a sit or from a stand, whatever it might be, you slice that into smaller movements, so smaller approximations of the behavior, and you can lure it and then mark it with a word, click treat, and that's going to be step 3. We'll get to that in a minute. And work it from there. So you can slice down very seemingly easy behaviors for us in our heads to a lot of slices.
That's so interesting because I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, what? That's 2 slices at most.
Right.
Like how?
Head and then legs,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But some dogs, I mean, a greyhound I worked with, they have those deep chests.
Yeah.
So one we figured out, okay, well, they don't have a lot of fur for padding on their elbows, so we're going to put down a dog bed.
Mm-hmm.
So that made it a lot more
Yeah.
comfortable, and they didn't mind laying down then. But then also we played around with the way they laid down. They didn't want to lay down straight like a sphinx.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to do like more of the macaroni down. So in my luring,
The macaroni down.
the little macaroni, like they kind of roll their hip over. Yeah. So in my luring, I had to change it to, rather than being straight down, I let them turn their head and kind of roll their hip first. So it is very individualized for the dog. But again, that's giving the dog the benefit of the doubt and adjusting my training mechanics to match their needs.
Yeah.
And still teach them what I want to teach them. And it's not like they were going to do competition obedience where they have to do that straight sphinx down. They just were in obedience class for fun, So that's slicing. So you can do that with the lure, or you can do what's called free shaping.
Yeah.
Which is still slicing the behavior down. So, and this is my favorite method of training because I can sit on my couch with a glass of wine. And I have a little tray of training treats in my clicker. But if you don't use a clicker, that's okay. You just use a marker word. Probably the most common one is yes. Not my favorite marker word because we can say it for lots of different contexts.
Yeah.
Like I say yes to people, and then my dog goes, so a lot of my clients now, I'm recommending use the word click. I mean, how often do you say the word click in normal conversations?
Right.
So that is a lot easier for clients to remember. You're not going to say it in other parts of the day, then your dog's going to go, where's my treat?
Yeah.
Right. So you slice a behavior down. And so, for example, my dog, I'm sitting on my couch with my wine, and right now we're working on getting in a cardboard box just because, just to keep her mind engaged. But I put the cardboard box in the middle of the room, and I slice down the behavior. Okay, getting into the cardboard box. What is the easiest slice of criteria for that? What's the smallest approximation? Looking at the box, right?
Yeah.
So anytime she looks at the box, click, and I toss a treat. I'm not giving her any lure. I'm not giving her any idea of what I'm
That is fun.
waiting for.
Yeah. That's totally like, it's also kind of like a telepathic game.
Maybe. Yeah. And so the only feedback she's getting is the marker, the click, and then the food reward, the reinforcement.
She's like, oh, you want me to look at this box? I'll look at this box.
So the first time she looks at the box, she gets to click at a treat, and because she's done free shaping before with me, she goes, oh, right? And she looks right back at the box, and I click and I throw a treat, right? And so when you first start free shaping, it's going to take your dog a little bit of time to figure out the game, right? To be like, oh, I can make you click. I never knew, right? Before, they were just waiting for us to show them,
right?
And then the click and treat might have happened, but free shaping's where the magic of clicker training happens. So you might see this, like when my dog comes up to you, she starts to offer behaviors.
Yes.
Yeah. Because she's trying to figure out, how do I train you?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what do I have to do to get the treat?
Right.
That's partly because of her free shaping experience. She goes, what do I have to do to make you click?
She goes through a lot of different skills.
Her whole repertoire. Yeah. And then barks.
Yes.
Corgi.
And stares at me like, don't you know what this game is? And I'm like, no.
No, I don't. Well, now you do.
I do, and also I probably knew anyway. I just am like, don't have anything,
have no
sorry.
treat.
And then she waves at me, and I'm like, still don't have any, sorry.
It's still not going to help you. But yeah, so that's the smallest approximation. When my dog or the dog I'm working with is like, they look at the box, click at a treat, and they immediately look back at the box, that's when I know, okay, I'm going to add the next slice on because they know what's getting them the click.
Yeah.
So they're like, yep, I got it. So then the next step might be walking towards the box or, say, sniffing the box, touching the box with their nose. And you're going to see some frustration when you raise the criteria in training. And that's kind of the point because my dog needs to be frustrated to try something new or to try something longer. Yeah. Right? So to push it to the next step. So she might be looking at the box and kind of giving me the side eye of like, Mom, I'm looking. And then she's like, ah, and she just punches it with her nose. And I'm like, click, and then gets the treat.
Right. And she's like, oh.
Yeah, so it's pushing them to figure out the next step and
Yeah.
to offer something else. So it's some patience training for us humans, hence
Mhm.
the wine.
Yeah, I was about to say, but you got wine, so you're all good.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of hanging out, waiting to tell her with the click and the treat what it was that I'm training.
That's fun. I gotta try this.
Yeah,
I
and
gotta
so
try this.
that whole behavior, again, you can slice it really small. But with Suki, she basically, since she's free shaped, she touched the box as the first step for
Yeah.
her. So she's like, oh yeah, I can do this. And then the next step was putting a foot in the box, and then it was 2 feet, and then it was 4 feet. Ask a corgi to put 3 feet in something, and that's just not going to work. It's not how they're built. So it was 1, 2, and then 4. And then it was get in the box and lie down.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be, this is our step right now, is get in the box, lay down, and stay. Right? So I'm going to add duration to it. So you can really slice behaviors down. Free shaping, again, is really just telling the dog only with your marker what it is that's getting them the treat, and then adding on the approximations as you go. So it's called free because we're not as involved. We're not luring.
Right.
We're not prompting with body language or things like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
Super fun way to train. The other way you can make a behavior happen, sorry, I talk about free shaping way too much, is capturing a behavior. So for behaviors that might be difficult to lure, or so like, for example, my dog, I want her, like, she does this stretch, right? She stretches her front legs out and her back legs out, and I want to get that on cue, kind of like take a bow or something. But I can't lure it with her. Like, because she has her short corgi legs, it's really hard for me to get the lure right.
Yeah.
Shaping, I could do free shape it, except I don't ever see her offer that kind of movement.
Right.
And I feel like it'd be a little awkward and I'd be waiting a really long time.
Yeah. And especially the like repeated kind of a.
Yeah. And like if I was to free shape that, I'd probably try to set it up for success and in my favor, doing it, say, at the end of the evening when she's a bit more tired and in the room where she likes to lie down. And then I'd really have to be very precise with my clicker on as she's laying down, and hopefully she lays down front elbows first. And sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes she does a little like roll up like a donut, So I'd have to click right as her front elbows hit, and then toss the treat so she gets up to get it before her back legs hit.
Right.
So it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm probably confusing.
Yeah,
too.
and it's not going to happen with lots of repetitions.
Right.
Close enough together for her to be like,
Right.
oh, okay. So this is a behavior that I do. It's called capturing, which is in the morning when she gets up. That's usually when she stretches. I'm making the behavior happen simply by taking advantage of it happening. So as she starts to stretch, I go, stretch, and she goes, ooh, and I
do
go,
that with Marshall
yes.
too.
And so she's stretching, and I go, yes. And then if I have a treat, I will give her a treat. Yeah. But for her, the mark word yes doesn't mean food. It means food or something else yummy. Her clicker always means food, right? So that's our differentiator. But I mark it in some way so that she knows what you did right there is what I like. And I had named it as she did it and then rewarded it.
Yeah.
Right? Usually with a tummy rub or something. So that's capturing a behavior, right? Or if a dog is naturally laying down and you're working on down, they lay down and you go, yes, or you click and you give them a treat.
Right.
Right. So you're just taking advantage of natural movements that they're doing. And you'll start to notice when a dog is reinforced for a behavior, they will keep doing it and doing it more often because they go, well, this really pays.
Yeah.
So capturing can really lead into faster learning later. But I've started to notice with Suki, she's starting to understand that association between stretch is this routine I do with mom in the morning, and I stretch my front legs out. So I'm starting to see that movement and that association building. It's a little slower process than say free shaping would be, but that's capturing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. What were we on? We're on step 2. So step 3, and this was kind of part of step 2 when we were talking about it. Is step 3 is marking and reinforcing the behavior.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm telling the dog what you're doing right there is what's getting you this yummy thing. Right. So treats are going to be usually your most powerful reinforcer for most dogs, but not always. Some dogs love toy play instead. But if you are using a clicker or only one marker word, then you want it to be connected to treats. And we have some great resources on our website, preventivet.com, that talk about clicker training and how to get started.
I'll link them in the blog post for this.
Because that's like a whole ton of information that,
Yeah.
that I could just go down that rabbit hole with you and we'd never get out.
But also I must mention, because of the spread of pet obesity, Dr. J would kill me if I didn't bring this up. We also have a... actually, I believe you wrote it, a whole article about phasing the treats out.
Yes, and that's later on.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're teaching a new behavior, you really want to make sure it's rewarded a lot.
Yeah.
And then you change schedules of reinforcement, which I think I also wrote. I think that's in the same article.
Probably.
But yeah, it's again, another rabbit hole we could go down.
And
but
we will eventually.
Yes.
But for now.
Food is definitely a powerful motivator, and it's something that I use a lot. And you've seen me here in the office. A lot of times my treats on my desk are Suki's regular kibble.
Yeah.
From her regular meal allotment. Like, she doesn't eat breakfast at home anymore. It's basically here in the office, whether it's for each repetition of a behavior I like not barking. Well, I shouldn't say not barking. For sitting with a mouth closed.
Yes.
She gets a little piece of kibble for that. Or in a snuffle mat or whatever it is. So you can use your dog's regular kibble for training. One note on that too is I don't want to starve my dog in order to increase their motivation for training treats.
Yeah.
So Suki doesn't eat breakfast in the morning, mostly because she doesn't want to. She's too tired. But like, I wouldn't say don't feed your dog at all day just so you can do some training in the evening and they'll be hungry. Like, feed them half. Make sure that they're not super, super hungry.
It's mostly about making sure you're not giving them 1,000,000 times too many calories.
Right, exactly. And make sure that they're getting exercise and things like that. So anyway, so you're going to mark the behavior that you're training and then reward it. That is step 3.
I think I can do that one.
Yes, that one. That's very simple, that one. And then you get to the point where the dog is offering the behavior more and more. And that's when you think about, okay, well, now I want to generalize the behavior. So you start somewhere really easy. Like, you're just going back to the heel example, teaching your dog to heel. You're in your home hallway and you're using that environmental block of the wall, and you work on healing. And then you start to generalize the behavior to where, okay, now I'm going to start practicing this in my living room without a wall right next to them. So this is where you might rely a little bit more on your lure, right? You make it easier for your dog when you raise the criteria. So they no longer have a wall on their left to keep them in position. Right. So you're going to keep a hand with a food lure in it, or a prompt with no food lure in front of their nose to tell them, follow this, you're in the right position, and then click and a treat happens, right? As long as you're in this position, the click and the treat happens. Right. And so you're taking away some of the the training wheels a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
And then you take it into the kitchen. You start to walk all the way through your house, and then you take it into your fenced backyard, say, right? And then you take it out to the front of your home on leash, and then you start to work. You just start to work in different environments, different places to generalize the behavior. And then as your dog gets to the point where this new behavior you're working on is getting stronger and stronger around higher levels of distraction, then you start to fade out your food treats, right? So that's where we get into the becoming a slot machine.
Right.
And basically your dog's playing the lottery in hopes that maybe this time I'll get it. Right. But that's part of step 4. So step 4 is really just practicing and then generalizing the behavior. That's thinking like a dog trainer. I mean, that's basically your behavior is done. That 4 easy steps. So the first one is think about what you want to train, define it, and then you make it happen, and then you reward it, right? And then you generalize it. Right. And part of that generalization is getting rid of food treats eventually, right? So that's how you train a new behavior.
And how often, I guess, would you say is like, I guess, what is there a best practice? I mean, my guess is like every day, but but not everybody can do that.
It definitely depends on your schedule, and then but also your dog. I think sometimes we get into the habit as humans of being like, okay, I set aside an hour to train my dog.
Right.
So we have to train the whole hour.
Right.
Like, first off,
That's too
I
much,
mean,
yeah.
nice try. Like, at least you set aside time, but it's too much time. I mean, the most Sookie, who's used to free shaping and things like that, really the most that I see her able to do is about 10, maybe 15 minutes, depending on the frequency of behavior, the repetitions, how fast they're happening.
Right.
Also, if you're using food treats, especially in the beginning of training a new behavior, your dog is going to get less hungry as they eat, as they get the treats. And so food becomes less motivating.
Right.
Right. But 5 minutes is a great, for adult dogs, is kind of a good goal maybe to do. So things like taking the first half of their breakfast, say, and doing repetitions and practicing a new behavior with half of their breakfast kibble. And you do that for a couple minutes, and then awesome job. Here's the rest of your breakfast in a stuffed Kong or work to eat bowl or whatever it is that you feed your dog out of. Hopefully a puzzle. Or a brain game. So you can fit in short little training sessions. One of my favorite things to do with Sookie is to do some free shaping during commercial breaks.
Oh yeah.
Although Netflix has really ruined that.
Yeah.
but if Jeopardy, you and me, Jeopardy friends, we definitely do that during the commercial breaks. So it's just practicing a behavior then. But really train for what works in your life schedule and make sure it's fun. Make sure if your dog is not enjoying it or you're getting frustrated because the dog isn't understanding what it is you want, that you just wait till next time.
Right.
Just be like, okay, well, we're going to do something else.
Right.
And I'm going to walk away, So that's important too. It should always be fun. Keep it short and sweet. We have an article about that as well.
Right.
And we also have an article that we'll post about daily training opportunities that there are, that some people don't think about. And then if you do sign up for like a dog training class, usually they're an hour. Although more and more I'm seeing a lot of them be like more 45 minutes, which is great. But honestly, you're really only doing about 15, maybe 20, maybe 30 if you're really pushing it, minutes of actual training the dog.
Yeah.
Because there are breaks between kind of each behavior. Yeah. The trainer's explaining what you're doing. They might
Dogs
do a
are probably
demo.
all sniffing each other.
Yeah, and then great trainers will also give the dogs those breaks where they get to play with their owner with a toy. And there's some studies out there that show playing with a dog after they learn something new actually helps with skill retainment. And I would say it'd be true for humans too, in my experience.
Think so. That makes sense. If something's enjoyable.
Well, and it ends with something enjoyable, and so it's easier to recall later.
Yeah.
But there's some cool studies coming out for that. And so I always like to finish a training session with like a game of tug or fetch or just a little wrestle session.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did we miss anything? Are we all ready to teach our dogs to do anything in 4 steps?
I mean, 4 steps. I'm just going to repeat them for everyone. First step, decide what you want to train. Really define it for you and your dog. And then step 2 is make the behavior happen or wait for it to happen. And then that step 3, mark it and reward it, right? So tell your dog what they did was exactly what you wanted with a marker and then give them a treat. And then as they get better and better at it, practice it and generalize it.
Awesome. This was great. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
It's always nice to have you here. And again, a happy belated Thanksgiving to everyone listening. And we will be back with another Pause and Play with Dr. J podcast soon. Take care. Thanks for listening. If you've got a question for Dr. J that you want him to answer on an upcoming show, head over to preventivevet.com/pauseandplay and fill out our form. You'll also find our podcast archive, as well as links to everything that we discuss on the shows. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter, which includes tips, alerts, and we even made sure to include some cuteness. It's a treat delivered to your inbox every other week. You can subscribe to Pause and Play with Dr. J on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. We'll talk to you again soon.